He's facing several charges, including obstruction of justice, linked to a 2008 child pornography trial in which he was acquitted. Kelly is accused of paying off an underage girl after allegedly filming himself abusing her. He is already serving a 30-year sentence for a separate sex trafficking charges. So for more on this trial, we want to bring in journalist Jim DeRogatis. He is the author of Soulless, the case against R. Kelly. So thanks for joining us. I feel like we have to sort of go back in time a little bit, so you can kind of like tell us how we got to this point with this case, because he actually walked on this situation in the early aughts. And now we're back and the victim is willing to talk. So tell us how we got here.
Well, the first story that the Sun-Times ran about Kelly abusing underage girls was 2000, December 21, 2000. And in February 2002, I got horrifying graphic evidence of that, a videotape, 26 minutes and 39 seconds of Kelly having sexual contact with a 14-year-old. It took an absurd 6 years because of a judge who consistently ruled in favor of the defense and the money and power Kelly had to delay the trial. In 2008, that trial, about one minor on one videotape, resulted in his acquittal. The judge had disallowed any evidence that this was a pattern of behavior, that there were other minors who had filed civil suits and been paid off and signed non-disclosure agreements. Aaliyah's name never came up in that 2008 trial. It was reduced to one girl on one videotape, and we now know, according to the prosecutor's indictment, that that girl and her family were paid off to disappear and not testify. So in some ways, this harkens back to one of the biggest travesties of justice in the history of the Chicago Cook County court system. In another, it brings new evidence to light of Kelly sexually abusing 14, 15-year-old girls and videotaping it, because that first video, along with several others, that first victim, who is now cooperating with the federal government, as well as several others, all are going to be laid out in the coming weeks as the prosecution makes its case.
So what's it been like for you watching this story unfold, given how close you are to it through your reporting?
There's an odd sense of deja vu now for the incidents of 2008 to be in a federal courtroom. But, I always defer. The turmoil in my life for 22 years reporting on this pales in comparison to the damage done to so many of Kelly's victims, 22 that resulted in his conviction on all counts in Brooklyn last fall, and now 4 or 5 young women in this video. What they're going through, having all of this in the headlines again, what every one of his victims is going through, it just is a horrible trigger, and it's traumatizing.
You pointed out that the 2008 case was very narrow. It just focused on one victim, one incident, no pattern. Now, and I have to say, this alleged victim is a full-fledged adult, and she is willing to testify. So that's a big difference between what happened in 2008 and what's happening now. But I'm wondering about what else is different about the trial. Are they taking into account, and I don't know if they can, the other conviction? He's already behind bars for abusing minors, or anything else?
Well, obviously, they can't bring in too much of what happened in Brooklyn. Excuse me. I think the major difference is going to be that original 26-minute and 39-second video was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Think about how long that is, the length of a sitcom, and a 14-year-old is being ordered about and abused for all of that time. Now there are multiple videos. Kelly, as was heard in federal court in Brooklyn, so I don't think allegedly needs to be part of it anymore, had a penchant for sexual contact with underage girls and boys, for arranging scenes of multiple sexual contact with these minors. I can only imagine, because I've heard tell in my reporting of some of these other victims and some of these other videos. I think the cumulative evidence that that jury is going to have to endure of this sexual abuse in living color on video. There was very little video and no explicit video and some disturbing audio in the first federal trial in Brooklyn. This is going to be all about these videos, and I don't see how anybody sees them and acquits. Of course, I didn't understand how that happened in 2008. And if that case hadn't been a travesty weighted by the judge in favor of the defense, in my opinion, I'm haunted by how many other young women would have been spared the trauma that they went through, because Kelly's behavior only intensified after his 2008 acquittal.
So you sort of mentioned what we can expect over the next couple of weeks. But again, one of the things I'm always curious about is prosecutors who choose to bring a case to jury trials. Presumably, they do that because they think they can win, right? The last time around, they did not win. This time, if you're going to go through that, if you're going to go through all of the things that you just mentioned, Jim, presumably the prosecutor thinks that there's a solid chance that they can convince a jury that he's guilty.
Yes, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. I was surprised at the width and depth and breadth of that case in Brooklyn in federal court last fall. They won on every count. He is sentenced to 30 years behind bars. This case, I believe, is just as strong, and it has that video. So, I had heard that Kelly was offered a plea deal to serve some time concurrent with the Brooklyn section, the Brooklyn sentence, and he passed on it. Whether that was because of Jennifer Bongine, his high-powered defense attorney, or his own hubris, he has never expressed remorse for any of the things he is now convicted of. There is no sense that he did anything wrong. And, he didn't testify in Brooklyn. He didn't make a statement in sentencing. We probably won't hear from him in the Chicago trial, but he thinks he is above the law. He thinks he is the world's greatest, to quote one of his song titles, and his talent as a musician allows him to behave any way he wants with no concern whatsoever to I know the names of 68 of his victims that I've spoken to. I believe that list is well into the hundreds. There were 22 victims in the New York trial. There's going to be 4 or 5 in this one. It's just a horrifying, we haven't wrapped our head around the fact that no one in the history of popular music has ever been convicted of as many crimes against women as this man. And let's face it, in this music world that I love and cover as a journalist and critic, men have treated women badly for a very long time. But no one has ever gotten a 30-year sentence, which now could be extended, doubled.
So, Jim, let me ask you, you said you've spoken to a number of his witnesses. Have you spoken to the witness that's at the center of this case? And if you have, I'm curious about why she decided to pursue it now. We don't know who she is. He's already been convicted, so he's being punished for this sort of behavior. She could easily just sort of allow that chapter to close for her, but she's going forward.
Well, I have never spoken to her or her mother or her father, although we tried very hard when that videotape came to us, and even a year earlier when we did our initial reporting, because we'd heard she was being sexually abused. But I spoke to her family members. Her aunt testified in the 2008 trial. So did, her basketball coach, some of her best friends and teachers. Many people wanted to stop the abuse of this girl at the time. I think she's testifying now because the full range of Kelly's behavior has been driven home by the journalism of 22 years by Surviving R. Kelly, the docuseries, certainly by the Brooklyn conviction. And I would also think that she has realized that Chicago failed her and so many young Black girls. The court system failed her, the schools failed her and others, because Kelly was but there's a picture of Kelly sitting in the stands at the high school in Oak Park, watching her play basketball. It read in the high school newspaper. All but a handful of Chicago cops. There were investigators who worked hard, but there were also Chicago cops who moonlighted as Kelly's security. Journalism failed, aside from the Chicago Sun-Times. Very few other media organizations covered this story. The Black church failed. The Reverend Jesse Jackson and James Meeks of Rainbow Push were Kelly's spiritual advisors, bringing kindergarten kids in free R. Kelly T-shirts in school buses to his court appearances in 2008. And the music industry failed. Now, two of his longtime sidemen, a key business manager and a gopher best friend, are on trial with him here. But we have still seen no one in the music industry, the heads of Jive Records, the biggest label of the 90s. R. Kelly was label mates with Britney Spears and NSYNC. They have never been held to account for the money paid to young girls to silence them for allowing Kelly's behavior to continue. I have on very good sources that Kelly generated $1 billion in income for Jive Records. Well, you know how the record industry is the record industry. He only made $250 million himself.
Wow. Quite a picture you paint, Jim.
It really is. Yeah. Jim, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's going to be an interesting month.
It really is.